So let us start the technical session now. So our first talk will be by Dr. Maunendra Desarkar from IIT Hyderabad. So just to introduce him briefly, he is an associate professor at the Department of Computer Science and the head of the Department of AI at IIT Hyderabad. And he will be talking on a very interesting and, if I can say, a futuristic topic. So till today, almost all over the world and in India, almost all research or NLP or legal documents is done in the English language. So even in India, like all the works which also we have done, they are all in English. But now it is well known that India is a multilingual country, and very few people actually are conversant in English. Of course, the audience here is not a statistical representation of the Indian population. In fact, only less than 15% of Indian population is actually well conversed in English. So the government is realizing that this, as well as the law fraternity, and now there is a push towards legal education as well as legal research in other languages, which are often low resource languages. So the first talk by Maunendra would be on multilingual and low resource NLP. So these techniques have not possibly been used in the legal domain as yet, but there is a huge scope of using them in the next couple of years, because the emphasis is moving towards, processing legal data in non-English or Indian languages. So I welcome Dr. Desarkar and hand this over to him.
Thank you, Saptarshi. So Kripa, IIT Hyderabad is not in Hyderabad. It's in a different district together, but not very far from here. So yeah, we are with you. Cool. So thank you, Saptarshi, and very good morning to all of you. So it's a pleasure to be here talking in a physical symposium, because these kinds of physical meetings also ensure physical interactions and discussions. And yeah, so thank you for your presence here. So we'll talk about this topic, where preparing for legal services in multiple languages, multilingual approaches with limited data. So one reason why AI in law, that research has not flourished as much it could have been or should have been so far. There are many reasons that both Saptarshi and Kripa has already mentioned. And another aspect towards that, even though people have started talking about it maybe a few years back, maybe 3 to 5 years back, but still data is a major hindrance. So we'll try to emphasize upon that aspect. So my presentation, the initial 7 to 8 minutes will be very basic. After that, we'll try to look at low resource and specifically multilingual NLP, which can be used for legal domain as well. So this is for advancing slides. Okay, so we all know that the current world is moving at a very, very rapid pace. And especially if we look at the last few years, things have changed. I mean, things are changing really, really very fast. Even the rate of that change is also very fast. So, it's a different debate whether the change that we are seeing is for good or for bad. But we cannot deny that things are changing. So there is a tremendous, continuous and significant growth in different aspects. We see growth in population. We see growth in infrastructure. And lots of newer organizations are coming up, which can support the infrastructures, which can actually offer different products and services to people. We also see a lot of consumers for those products. And there are many other things that we can really list down, which are actually growing. But the thing is, with the increase in all of this, equally increasing are the conflict among people, there are conflicts for resources. Who is going to grab which resource? There's a contention for resources. There are aspects of mistrust. Organizations are collaborating together, but what are the things of one organization that can be used by the other organization? That is, again, there are lot many aspects there. Mistrust is there among people. Misuse of different products, services, and all these. So with the growth in all these aspects, which are actually good, population, infrastructure, organization, product, service, and so on, the other problems that come are the points highlighted in red. And this is where legal frameworks come handy. So they act as a regularizer in the entire society. However, if we say that these things are increasing, and legal frameworks are the regularizer, then we would expect that in the real world, this should also grow at a roughly equal pace. But unfortunately, that is not happening. Number of legal professionals and the legal infrastructure is not growing at the pace at which it is required or expected to grow. To give some numbers, so these are the number of, one lawyer per how many people in the country. So in US, there is, I shouldn't say lawyer, legal professional. One legal professional per 248 US citizens. We go to Italy, very similar. Come to India, it's 1:951. Really, really very large gap. France, 1200. So we need to do something so that even with this limited pool of very much valuable people, can we offer the proper legal services to the common citizens? Now, we all know that technological advancements, we are aware of the technological advancements which are happening of late. And this is a very valid question, again, which was highlighted by Saptarshi and Kripa, and also, can technological advancements assist the legal frameworks? Maybe in analysis. So sometimes, there is so much of legal data. If you look at many times we get to hear in news reports that there was, some case or something, the response, 4,000-page response has been provided for that. Now, who is going to go through that 4,000 pages? So even for very, maybe no case is simple, but if we can still use the term, for simple cases also, if you look at the documents, they're actually very big. If you look at all the supporting claims, arguments, it's very difficult to go through them. So is it really possible to use some of those things? It is possible to analyze that data in some meaningful way so that the decision making becomes simpler. So we are very far from the situation. I don't know whether that situation will anyway arise or not, where AI can finally make the decision, especially in legal circumstances. Possibly, that we should not aim for at this point, but at least can it help as a decision support system? And if we can do that, obviously, we all can say that it will be helpful for common citizens or users, because the wait time will get reduced. They'll get better understanding of the laws. Legal experts also, for one case, many of them are handling many cases simultaneously. So even it will be helpful for them. So the system will be helpful for the lawyers and judges. Now, coming to some example problems, I think some of these problems we are quite aware of. Following this, there is a paper presentation session where some of you will be talking about quite a few relevant problems. I have listed out a few problems from my side. And one is a legal document summarization. As I mentioned, and as we all are aware of, legal documents are quite big. Even inside a big document, if you pick one sentence, the sentence is so long, at least it happens for me, by the time I reach the end of the sentence, I forget what is there at the beginning. So there are so many different clauses. If you look at the phrasal structure, the the structure, constituency, or dependency parts of that sentence, it is becoming very complicated. So for a, for people who have achieved some basic level of education, even for them, it is very difficult to understand. Now think of the people who are, not fortunate enough to have at least that level of education. For them, what is this? Then will be at the mercy of others who explain the things to them. And also even for legal experts also, going through that 4,000 page and then, understanding or preparing a summary is very difficult. So this can be one problem. Another is question answering. So when we install any software, we see this licensing agreement and all these different things. I don't think I have ever read any of those till the very end. Now, suppose there is a, I've just had a glance at that, and then there's a question that I have in my mind. Can there be a system which can look at that document and identifies the answer to my query from that document? It will be very helpful. You can also think of, many times the government comes out of with different schemes. For different schemes, there are different eligibility criteria. There are certain, level of support that they can get. Now, it's not completely legal document, but even for these kinds of documents, if somebody has a question and there could be a system which can pinpoint the correct answer to that question, it will be immensely helpful. We can think of a writing assistant also. So suppose there is a person who is preparing an argument, okay, to be presented at court, or maybe that 4,000 document that I am talking about, he's preparing a part of that. Now he has all the facts and certain legal arguments and other things in his or her mind. And can there be a system which helps him or her to prepare a draft of the thing that should be presented? So, although these could help, this could help the end users as well as the legal professionals. We can, when there can be many other cases. For example, this was from a news article which came a couple of days back. 37 years on, conviction based on man's dying declaration revoked. So there was one person who was in prison for 37 years, or there was a judgment that was given that was based on the dying statement of an individual. So typically in legal frameworks, the dying statements, they are given a high importance. Possibly the understanding is that people who are dying, they don't lie. Now, based on this conviction, the main argument was based on the dying statement of a person. After 37 years, a few days back, the judgment has come that the conviction which is solely based on dying statement is not the right way. So whenever the conviction is there, there should be guarantee. There should not be any ambiguity. Now, this person has suffered. Now, suppose there is another similar situation. Another person is going to get convicted based on somebody's dying statement only. The lawyer can actually pull out these kinds of things, and this becomes the precedences or prior cases which can help him or her to build the case, and this can be very, very helpful for the person in question, right? So identifying prior legal cases will be very useful in legal domain. Then there was another very recent thing where finally the judgment was State Human Rights Commission cannot entertain service matters. So in Kerala State Human Rights Commission, they passed certain judgments regarding to service rules and all that. Now that was overruled. And all that effort that was made to come to the State Human Rights Commission's judgment on service matters, that time could have been saved if somebody told at the very beginning, they don't have the right to make these judgments. So who is allowed to do what? What kind of things are accepted? What kind of things are not accepted? Even these kind of binary judgments, if these things can be provided by legal, by AI-enabled systems, that will save time a lot. There are many such cases. Yeah, okay, this smaller chart sheet, 1406 pages only. And then this is one more, not sure if it is visible from there. So this is in Bengali. So now efforts have started where some of the documents, these kinds of rules or gadgets, these are also now being provided in regional languages. So this one is about domestic violence. Now we all know that in many parts of the country, especially among people from low income group, people with lower literacy levels, these things are there. Okay. And we all know that there are certain rules, there are certain laws. Now, if you look at this big document, okay, this document was not very big, maybe some 3 to 5 pages only. So there it also has a section which says, if something happens to you, what is the procedure in which you can process and present your case? Now, final judgment is one thing, but people should know that these are the provisions that I have. These are the steps that I should follow. It should not be the case that I go to some lawyer and he or she misguides me and asks for certain things which are not needed, or I myself do not possess certain proofs or evidences due to which the case will be not very strong. So suppose there are such documents and we can very crisply highlight what are the things which are needed, even that could be very beneficial for the end users. Examples could be many. So yeah, so there could be many such examples. However, yeah, so these are the references from where these examples were taken. The considerations are the data. Now, when we say data, the laws are quite different from country to country. The laws which are there in US, the laws which are there in France, the laws which are there in India, laws will be different. Now, suppose we are having some question answering kind of domain, and a user is simply posing a query that what should I do in this case, or what is the penalty for this? Now, the penalty can be different in different countries. The applicable, penal code also can be different in different countries. So, if we want to have a legal system which is trained based on data coming from different, data is very scarce, right? Now, suppose we take data from different legal institutions at different places, different countries. Now, there might be scenarios where the system gives incorrect answers because it fetches the response from some document which is not aligned with our legal judgments. So data and region-specific data is very important. And then data for different languages, that is also very important if we want to look at the regional languages as well. Now, let me move on to the language aspect of this work. So we need to consider multilinguality, and we all know why. So language understanding is another major hindrance to receiving legal help. So it's not that people who are highly educated and who are very familiar with English language, only they need legal help, others do not. It's not the case. And most of the documents are in English. And a considerable population in the world has limited or no knowledge of English. So this table we saw earlier, right? Now see, US mostly speaks English. Italy, they speak Italian, Germany, German, India, there are so many different languages, France, French. So most of these countries are again non-English speaking country. So yes, even for a single country, even for a single language, if we want to provide, even that will require immense amount of data for training the systems on. And then if we come to countries like India, which is multilingual in nature, there are so many different languages. There are 22 So there are different language families, and to cater to all of them is very difficult process. But the good thing is that the efforts have started. So the motivation of the work, some of the work that we do, is to take the benefits of technological advancements to all these languages. Okay, and this is a major challenge: unavailability of annotated data sets for different tasks. So we have looked at some examples, and now suppose we are planning to design a legal system. For example, let us fix one task in mind. It's a summarization, okay, or maybe question answering. So what we'll do, maybe we'll start with a language for which we have large amount of data, maybe English. So we have an input. There is a, let us consider this to be a black box now, a summary generation method, which is trained on English data, and it produces the output in English language. Now we say, okay, why not Hindi? Then we train another system with Hindi language data. Then, okay, why not Telugu? So another one. Assuming we have data, but there's the first problem: data may not be available, a sufficient amount of data to make correct, confident predictions that may not be affected. So we need annotated data for each language. That is one challenge. Can you spot any other challenge with this approach? Different models for different languages. See, if we think about these kinds of systems, we need to see that, okay, these frameworks, there could be different startups which provide legal, this kind of helps in decision support. There could be small NGOs which can also venture into providing this kind of support. All of them do not have the infrastructure like the Googles or Facebooks have. So maybe they have serious limitation on their infrastructure, the memory that they have, the servers that they have. Now, periodic retraining of all these models, storing one different model for one different language, this becomes very difficult. So in the ideal world, can we train in one language and test on all other languages so that we have only one model? The input can be in any language and we can get the output accordingly. So our goal is to reach this stage. Okay, but it's a journey that's happening. We are yet to reach that one. So now I'll talk about one of our works which got accepted in findings of ACL 2021. It's called ZMBERT, which is an unsupervised cross-lingual transfer framework for language generation. So focusing on these kinds of tasks. So I'll skip the literature review part. So there are many approaches that people have taken for this kind of cross-lingual transfer or having one single model for different languages. So in many cases, people try a good translator. So for example, you want to, your input is a document in Tamil and you want to generate a summary in Tamil. So first thing that many people do is convert the Tamil input to English input, then pass it to the model, the black box, and it provides the summary in English. Now translate it back to Tamil. You'll get the thing. Then another approach is that by using pseudo training data. So this model is not English specific. This model will understand English and Tamil, or maybe Tamil also. But how do they train this model? They have these pairs of X and Y, but original data set was in English, right? So this English data by translation, they convert to the low resource language data, maybe Tamil data. So English input, English summary, by translation, it gets converted to Tamil input, Tamil summary. And now we have sufficient data to train this model. We rely on this model, we get a good accuracy. I mean, that was the hope. But although they are beneficial, but the benefits, the accuracy levels reach certain stage, but it's difficult to go beyond that. What could be the reason? So there is a dependency on the machine translation part here. And that's where the problem lies, because the machine translation systems are still under development. There are quite a few good translation systems which have come up, but none of them are accurate. And then in our supervision data only, if we have noise, the output also will be noisy. And specifically, when we are talking about low resource languages, still for Hindi, Tamil, Telugu, Bengali, good amount of data can be obtained. But what about Konkani? What about Marathi, Assamese, Mizo, Bodo, these kind of languages? They will be very error prone. So every time we'll be injecting lots of noise into the training system, the learning system, and this will, on the system will not be usable. So is there any other way in which we can do the same thing, keeping in mind the low resource scenario? So this, so there are some back translation based approaches also. I'm skipping that in interest of time. So what we want, so we want to develop a framework, okay? Not one single algorithm, but an algorithmic framework. So we focused on the language generation task. Okay, so if you look at summarization, headline generation, okay, or question answering in the true sense, so those will be language generation tasks because the output is a language, a text sequence, right? So we need a framework that can generate natural language text. It does not require parallel data because parallel data is very difficult to get. Does not rely on back translation. Back translation will include error. Handles different general tasks in different languages, and does not need task-specific supervised data for different languages. Okay, so we have a training data for English that is sufficient. We should not ask for training data in, say, Hindi or Punjabi and those languages. So we have a method or framework. That framework we call Z-Embed. It's a natural language generation model, and it does not require parallel data. It uses monolingual data only for the different languages. Getting monolingual data is not very difficult. We have different news articles and all that. So monolingual data we can get very easily. Back translation, those are used to get some kind of language alignment. So that also will not have, but will propose some kind of auxiliary task to bridge this gap. And we should look at different tasks and languages in our evaluation to have more confidence on the performance of the framework. And we should try on 0 or few short setups. So that means we do not rely on high availability of data. So we'll move on. So the approach that we had proposed is an encoder-decoder based approach for generation. So some of you might be aware. So how many of you are familiar with encoder-decoder models for language generation? Okay, around 70% audience. So in encoder-decoder based approaches, what happens is that you give as an input that passes through the encoder. Okay, some intermediate representation is formed, and that intermediate representation goes to the decoder. From there, the decoding starts, and we get the final output. So there are quite a few very prominent, very popular encoder-decoder based architectures which are there. And many people actually suggested that, okay, why not you train some kind of, you make use of some kind of multilingual encoder-decoder based models, right? Some large multilingual language models. But the problem is that, I mean, we also experimented with that and we saw that results are not very good. So only using multilingual language models will not be sufficient. Certain other things also needs to be done. And one of the things that we try to do here, to have one different kind of training strategy and training curriculum. So this work will talk about that training strategy and training curriculum. So we start with some pre-initialized embeddings from multilingual pre-trained model. So we take Embed for that. So Embed is an language model for multilingual data. But then we realized that the Embed representations may not be very suitable because the way this Embed model is trained, it uses masking and denoising objective for getting the token representations. So what is masking objective? So suppose the input is a sentence. I think the next page, somewhere in the future slides, it might be there. The input is a sentence, then you mask a few words from there. Okay. And now if the model can predict what were the masked tokens, then you can assume that the model has started understanding the language. Otherwise, it would not have been able to predict the masked tokens. Okay. Another thing is denoising. So you corrupt the input. What could be the different ways of corrupting? Masking is definitely one way of corrupting the input. Some other ways could be, you take a phrase and permute that. Okay, you take a word, replace with some other word. We're injecting some noise, and from this noisy input only, if when you pass it to the architecture, if it is able to predict back the original thing, then again you have some belief that it has learned the nuances of the language in a better manner. So MBERT has been trained like that. However, for language generation, what we saw is that the generation happens in autoregressive manner. So token by token, the final output is generated. Suppose I'm trying to generate a summary. So the first word of the summary is generated. Then the next word will be generated. And while generating, we'll look into what are the words that have been generated so far and what is there in the original input, right? So it gets generated in this way. On the other hand, the masking and denoising, okay, in many cases can be trained with some kind of classification. Okay, this is a masked token. What is the output? I mean, what is there in the masked token? So it's a classification kind of task. These are the possible words from the vocabulary, which is a good fit here. So it's a multi-class classification way also. So we tried to look at some mechanism where the machine actually is trained on some kind of autoregressive task. So that's where we bring in an auxiliary task. So we have an auxiliary task to further pre-train the embeddings. Okay, it looks at the languages under consideration, and but again we do not need any parallel data. We need any do not need any translation service. So we work with only monolingual data. So this was MBERT. Let me skip that. And so let me talk about the auxiliary task here. So we take the pre-trained checkpoint of MBERT. And then the auxiliary task is defined as given an input passage, generate few random sentences, which we'll call a random summary from the passage. So how to generate passage? So suppose we are looking at addressing the Punjabi language. Okay? So we have monolingual data for the Punjabi language. Maybe 1,000 examples are there. So as an input, we have the passage, expected output, we have the summary. Now this is an auxiliary task. That means the training data for this we need to generate ourselves. So training data means the input passage should be there and the expected summary also should be there. So very simple, crude approach we take. So we have the monolingual data, we shuffle it in some manner. We generate a random number I denoting the starting point and a random number K, which denotes the size of the passage. So I to I plus K, these sentences we take as the input passage. It's a dummy task, dummy input. Then concatenate these sentences into P. So this is our passage. And then we have the summary. So for summary, what we do is we randomly take 20%. This 20% also can be lesser. No, it's just a number that we have put here. And we say those sentences should be there in the summary. Now, this is a summary, and this becomes our input example. Okay. We create many such pairs. We get the inputs to train. So this is the auxiliary task, and this thing is trained. Then we do task-specific fine-tuning on English supervised data. So fine-tuning is done on only English supervised data. We do not expect supervised data for any other language. Then we have zero-shot or few-shot evaluation with low-resource languages. And there are a few other things that should be kept in mind. For example, many times after all these, if you train with English data, fine-tune on English data, the model will remember many times when we study the main questions before the exam, what happens, that thing sits in our mind. And so it will start giving the outputs in mostly in English, although the input might be in some other language. So that we want to avoid. And the other thing is that often we also see code mixed output being generated. That also needs to be avoided. And we do that using some techniques. So we'll directly go to some of the evaluation results. So we looked at 4 different tasks. So the auxiliary task was same for all the tasks. So one single very crude level auxiliary task can actually help in multiple different final end tasks, downstream tasks. So this was the method ZMBird, and for different tasks for different evaluation metrics, the summary is that it does well. It does better than many other alternatives that we tried on. And the languages that we tried were, Hindi, Japanese, and English. So 3 languages from 3 different language families, we can say. These languages are quite different. And everywhere the results were promising. These were some examples. So it was taken from a news article, which was there after the Pulwama attack. So this was the news passage, and it was headline generation. So the ground truth headline was that encounter in Pulwama, Kashmir, a terrorist killed. So the Hindi language headline, ground truth headline was Kashmir ke Pulwama mein mudbher, ek atanki dher. And the headline that the model generated was Pulwama mein jhari mudbher mein ek atankbadi dher. So very similar, and it's not only one example. Across many examples, we saw these kinds of high quality predictions where the model has not seen any Hindi passage, Hindi headline kind of pairs for training. So this is one, and there was one for question generation. So this was a very interesting problem setup where the passage is there and an answer is given. The model has to predict a question for this. So this is often useful for reading comprehension, question generation kind of tasks. So here it's about a flood that happened in UK, and 30,000 people had to be removed from their houses. So the answer is given as 30,000. The task of the model is to predict a question for which 30,000 will be a reasonable will be the answer. So the human generated question was बाढ़ के कारण कितने लोगों को निकाला गया, and the model generated question was कितने लोगों को उनके घरों से हटाना पड़ा. Semantically very similar if we remember the context here. So then there were some examples from Japanese also. So to conclude about this work is that ZMBird is an unsupervised framework. Never we used any annotated examples for the low resource language tasks like Hindi or Japanese. And multiple experimental setups were considered, but auxiliary task was very crude. We saw that even with that crude example, there was a good boost in the final performance. So if we are able to design better auxiliary tasks, maybe we'll be able to do even better. So that was one. However, if we want to adapt these problems to the legal domain, there are some additional steps or challenges that need to be addressed. For example, we need to incorporate additional knowledge to guide the generation process through linguistic features. Then identifying the pieces that cannot be missed out. When we talk about legal documents, those big documents, those big sentences, why people just, it's not that people like writing like that and they write. So they try to make that the claims and all those things are very watertight. So that's why the sentences become long and so on. So we need to identify the pieces that cannot be missed out. And also if we have different audiences in mind. So it's for, a common person like you and me, and not the legal professionals who are here, versus if it is for the judge. If we want to generate the summary based on different audiences, the summary should actually look different. So even that kind of complexities can be brought in. And yeah. So there is one more work which is there, but I'll not go through that in detail. I'll just give you the outline. So here we treated Hindi as separate, Japanese as separate. We can also treat Punjabi, Bhojpuri, Marathi, all those languages separate. But the fact is that if you look at Indian languages, the languages also have some similarities among them. So Gujarati may be close to Hindi, Bhojpuri may be close to Hindi. Punjabi also may be some similarity with that. The South Indian languages, they may have some similarity among them. So languages which are Bengali, Oriya, Assamese, they may also have some similarities among them. So is there a way in which we can make use of that language similarity and exploit that inside the modeling so that the model does better? Okay. So we had one more work where we try to exploit these language similarities based on typographical features. Okay, this pointer has some issue maybe. Battery? So essentially what we do is for each language, so we need to first identify which languages are similar. One thing could be like, somebody says, okay, these languages are similar. But again, we hire somebody, that person gives, these kind of language clusters, these languages are similar and that information. But then we decide, okay, one more language needs to come. So again, we need to go to the person and say, okay, is this similar to some other language and so on. So we wanted to avoid that. So there is a step for language clustering. So different languages can actually have their representations based on the typological features that they have. So which can come from linguistic knowledge repositories like WELS. Then people have also experimented with tag representations from tasks. So in machine translation, suppose you are translating from English to Hindi. So when you train the system, you can add a tag called English, then give the English sentence, then have a separator, then add a tag for Hindi and the Hindi sentence. So like that, you can train the system. And in this process, the machine will actually learn the tag representations for that English, the special token English, the special token Hindi, and all other languages also, if you have that in your system. So those tag representations also can be taken. Many people have used those kind of tag representations. And then actually you can fuse these languages, these representations. After fusing, you can also do some other transformation to make sure that, okay, this fusing and that final fused representation makes sense. So there are some works which have done that to understand language similarity, and we try to make use of some of those lines of work. Oh, is it? Then I'll stand here. Then maybe I'll use this one. Oh. So these were the different languages that we consider 30 different languages, and each language had a representation, and we did a hierarchical clustering, and we selected 3 clusters. So hierarchical clustering gave us the liberty of deciding the number of clusters on the fly. And we saw that cluster 1 has 14 languages, cluster 2 had 8 languages, and cluster 3 have 8 languages again. And these languages are languages from the world, not Indian languages, because we can say that at least for evaluation we need to have some annotated data. So those were there for the other languages. And then a very simple measure of identifying a centroid language based on Euclidean distance was done. And then we had a meta-learning based algorithm, where in meta-learning, there's a concept of different tasks and task similarity. And we said, we're not dealing with tasks here, we're dealing with languages. And languages are, were introduced, or people, so the main use of language is to communicate, right? And if I have some idea to communicate, and there are different languages, so each language will be able to communicate that idea in some form. So languages inherently are similar. So if we can, from the usability perspective. So can we make, so that's why we consider languages as tasks themselves, and tasks have similarities here. And I'll not go through the algorithm. And there were some other things. I'll just go to the. So here we took only 2 tasks, but multiple data sets and multiple different languages. There were 30 different languages that we experimented on. And there were some automatic as well as human evaluation metrics. So, we're not familiar with all these languages. So human evaluation was limited to the languages that we know. Summary, this one did better than others. And there are some other things. Summing up, so we need to cater to the needs of different languages. We need to focus on tools and data. Tools could be the frameworks like ZMBERT or these meta-learning based approaches. And data we need for at least evaluation purpose. When somebody, maybe legal experts, can give us, okay, if there's the input, there's the summary, of there's the input, there's the question, there's the answer. So these kinds of things we need help on from the data perspective. We may need to understand the languages also, maybe languages, how they are similar and so on. If we are able to get that, the frameworks can be, the benefits of the frameworks can be exploited even more. And the appropriate paradigm needs to be followed, that work well under low resource or zero shot or few shot scenario. So data scarcity is a major challenge in NLG task for legal domain. And only sequence to sequence may not work. So what are the other things that might be needed? Again, we are talking about legal documents, the legal things. So it should be factually correct. And how do we ensure that factually things are correct? So if there is some structure, some knowledge structure, which this model can build upon, which these models can take clues from, so that will be very much needed. So there are works on getting, preparing knowledge graphs for legal kinds of legal domain. So those things can be used. And it is important to see how that can be integrated with this kind of sequence to sequence framework. The second thing that comes to my mind is explainability. So whatever you generate, there should be a way to verify that it is correct, it is appropriate. So that explainability aspect needs to be inbuilt in the mechanisms. So next. Yeah, consistent and to the context. Next. And possibly in an appropriate language or tone, depending on the consumer. Is it for the end user or the legal expert or the person who is finally providing the judgment and so on. Next. So with that, let me end this presentation. If you have any questions, please feel free to ask. Yeah. Similarity between languages. So each language has a representation. So the representation is a real vector. And how do we get that representation? There are some typological knowledge sources, like WALS is one, World Atlas of Language Similarity possibly. So that is one. And then for different language tags also, the embeddings can be obtained. Now we fuse that. So finally, for each language, we have a vector. And once we have the vectors, we use cosine distance as the distance measure.
Can you go to the example slide very early that you had? Okay. There was this example that you gave where you said that state human rights and services, right? There is a kind of a game that is played by the lawyers and the courts, right? So lawyers would want to increase the envelope to get a better judgment for their clients, and courts want to be more rigid in terms of not diluting the law, right? So therefore, by looking at that, you cannot fight this. Because the
Right.
annotation, okay, in terms of a legal case document, comma, summary notation in the legal case document, and then some other things.
Okay, so I'll take the first question. So it's very much valid point that you raised. Even for the same thing, if you look at the arguments made by two different lawyers, it's always a gaming that is going on. Now, this may possibly say, okay, there are some prior cases where these things were ruled out, okay, or these things were turned down. Now, based on that, the other person can actually make a judgment whether to go ahead with that or not. So it will just give those kinds of soft indicators. It will not finally make that final judgment. So that is number one. And number two, the experimental results that we shared here, the datasets that were talked about, so those were not from legal domain.
Okay.
So those were for regular things. If we want to take it to the legal domains, we can try these methods, but there are certain other things that we should also consider. For example, the factuality, the explainability, and other things. So as of now, we have not worked on legal documents summarization. Data.
Another important aspect about especially the legal case files that you find is that many of the legal case files have been written by the judges, and each judge or the judge team, the clerks and various other people, have a different style of writing. And therefore, the documents tend to be noisy, they tend to be repetitive, they tend to be have typographical errors, especially when it comes to the dates. They may, put 2009 instead of 2019, and so on, right? So therefore, having a language model that can be robust to such noisy and grammatically wrong, inconsistent legal case files. What are your thoughts on that?
Right. So now somehow my feeling was that legal professionals, when they write, they will write the right things. So if you look at all the different kinds of inputs based on which the large language models are trained, many of them come from blogs, some of them come from books and all that. And there, a variety of styles actually come in. So variety of styles should not be a problem. And if the errors are, and if you look at the entire data, and if errors are a very small portion of it, I think still the models will be able to generalize well. That then we are talking about one single input, and model needs to have some kind of understanding of the logical sequencing. Now these models, so far, the things that we have used so far, or which exist so far, the logical understanding is very less in them. So somehow, indirectly that may flow in, but directly it's very difficult to get that one. So suppose I want to generate something which says the summation of 3 and 2 is 5. Even to generate this, this may be difficult if I give the prompt as the sum of 3 and 2 is a kind of thing, because it is trained based on how the context is, how words occur together, and so on. But internally there is a logical operation or mathematical operation that is going on. It has a specific form. So that general learning it has not had.
Okay. I am Kamal from IIIT Hyderabad.
Thank you. Thank you for the questions.
Yeah, when you ask questions, can you please introduce yourself briefly?
Good morning, sir. My name is Shubham Pandey, and I am a researcher at IIT Kharagpur. I primarily belong from the field of law, so my question would not be technical in nature, but in general, and I'm curious to know as to when you mentioned about a one-size-fits-all model, whereby you put input in any language and it will give output as you desire. Sir, how are you going to reconcile the fact that every language family has a different set of grammatical rules, and every language has a different set of characters? Like English has 26, German has 28, Mandarin has more than 150, and so has many South Indian languages. How the model is going to reconcile these two facts?
Right, good question. So, so if you look at the models have looked at languages of, examples of that language through monolingual examples. So if the amount of monolingual examples, if those are significantly large, then the language construct and other things, the model will be able to pick up. And then there is a shared vocabulary which is there. Now from the vocabulary also the terms can get picked up. So if you think, how a child learns to speak a language, not based on grammar or something. The child listens to the things that is happening, maybe the mother, the parents, they talk and all that, the friends talk. So based on that, automatically the sense of grammar gets built in. So this is trying to mimic something of in a similar way. So from monolingual only.
Sir, I believe you mentioned also somewhere in your talk that the idea is to express the idea, no matter the language. So is that what the basic premise would be of the models, to express the idea inherent in the language rather than focusing on the rules and characters?
Not really. So the language's own intricacies that needs to be, otherwise it, finally what the model generates, it can be a random arrangement of different words that will not make sense. On the other hand, if we know that, okay, languages have their similarities, and this is how in one language one thing is said. So suppose, this is how in Assamese or in Oriya, this language is this thing is said. Maybe the way the same thing is said in Bengali will be very similar because the languages have similarity. Or maybe the way certain thing is said in Marathi and the same thing how it is mentioned in Hindi, there will be significant similarities because the languages are similar. So language similarity comes in from that angle. But in order to produce something in one language, the model has to see some examples of that language. It may not be from the supervised perspective. It's not needed to pass to the model this thing like this is the court case written in Marathi. This is the Marathi summarization. That may not be needed. But these are some Marathi sentences. Learn your Marathi from here.
Thank you, sir.
Thanks.
Hi, I'm Pragya Upadhyay. I'm an assistant professor at Pitch Pilani Hyderabad campus. So my question is a bit orthogonal. I wanted to ask you, how can we incorporate this temporal thing to this model? Because, the laws, they keep on changing. So what is relevant now, it might not be relevant maybe 2 years from now, maybe because of some changes. So do you think the model will also be able to handle like inputs like until this date, what was the summary or something like that? So
right. So far, these models are not taking into account the temporal aspects. It's a very good question and a very open question, actually. So for question answering and other things, somehow if we have a retrieval or retrieval augmented generation kind of stuff, there we can have more emphasis on the recent documents. But when it is simply about, without the retrieval mechanism based on large language model only, something has to be generated based on one input. So there the temporal aspect needs to be taken into account. How, it is not very clear at this moment.
okay. Because what we have seen, like even the generative models, ChatGPT, like when you ask it a very recent question, it says that I don't know. So
Right.
do you think that is the way to handle it, or it can, do
So-
a like before this date, after this date, that kind of reasoning? Do you think it is
Right.
possible?
So that
to
kind of reasoning will
incorporate?
be helpful. And also it's important for the model to say, I do not know, when it knows that it doesn't know.
Yes, that's very important.
Especially for the legal domain.
Yeah.
But yeah, this temporal aspect in this language modeling is
Okay.
something which is needed.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Right. That's true. So laws in US may be different from law in India and all those. Right. That's true.
Sir, I'm Reshma. I'm Reshma Sheikh from NIT Trichy. So I have a question related to languages and translation. Like when we consider legal domain, like legal language, we call it as a legalese language. It has a lot of legal terms. So when we have, for example, in English, theft and fraud are considered same, but in legal language, there are two different crimes. So it should not be like, we can't, when
Right.
you do back translation or when you do some data augmentation strategies, we can't actually mix up. So how can we handle these things in?
Again, that's a very valid point. Some translation and those kinds of data sets which are built on common general corpora. This is, these kinds of problems may come in. On the other hand, there are certain terms which are similar when we talk about domain. However, in a general sense, when we talk about the terms may not be similar, or vice versa. The example that you gave falls under that category. In fact, in many cases, people try to have domain-specific large language models. Legal BERT is there, possibly. Legal BERT is there.
Yeah.
Then Pharma BERT is there.
Yeah.
So people try to generate, develop models specific to domains.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, in the interest of time, let this be the last question. Then the speaker would be around. So maybe in the break and all, we can have offline discussion.
Thank you, sir, for the nice talk. So this is Sachin Pawar from TCS Research. So my question is about the explainability point that you mentioned. I agree that it's going to be very important for the legal domain. But have you, let's say, suppose this work, if you want to extend it to legal domain, so for summarization, what kind of, what will be the form of explanation that you think will be useful? Like why certain sentence was excluded or why certain portion was included? So have you thought about it or?
Yeah, so either explainable or interpretable the model has to be. So whatever sentences are there, the one can actually refer to the original document. Okay, these are the things that, these are the sentences which were borrowed when we generated this one. At the same time, there should also be some kind of coverage kind of mechanism. So which says, okay, if this sentence is there, it essentially covers all these aspects in the original thing. And somehow we need to ensure that the coverage over the entire input. I mean,
some kind of aspects from the earlier text and how many of them you have covered through this, like what percent? So maybe that kind of, that may be one option of form of explanation. That's what you think.
that might be one form. So you mentioned very correctly, it's not only about what is there and why it is there. It's also important to say what is omitted and why it is omitted.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, so thanks, Maunendra, again. So as you said, these techniques are not yet used in the legal domain, but I strongly believe that in the next couple of years, these techniques of low resource language generation as well as reasoning with low resource language, they will find a big application in the legal domain. Because in the since last August, September, actually the Indian government also has declared in several forums that they would like to start more legal education as well as discussion in English. And again, the Supreme Court has started now publishing their verdicts, not only in English, but also in several regional languages. So there is a global, understanding that not everyone speaks English. So there should, but everyone needs law. Like people in different economic backgrounds and all need law. And especially like people who are not so fortunate to have formal English education, they also need law. So therefore, there is this understanding that legal knowledge needs to be exchanged and understood in low resource Indian languages also. So I think these kind of techniques would be very helpful for these applications. Okay, thanks a lot. Let's give again Maunendra a big hand.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
So I think PK, the Iraj is picking up. Yeah, so great to see a good audience.